that
Yeah.
as much as the rising gen needs to be ready, the leading generation needs to be ready to. And it's not a baton pass. It is like I call it a potato sack race, that we are in it together with different destinations. And so that's complicated.
Hello, and welcome back to the Family Wealth Edge. Vincent, we have a friend with us today.
A most special friend, Kristen.
Yes, indeed. So we're super excited that we have Torri Hawley with us. She is the CLO for Tamarind Learning US, and we have a really good topic too. We wanted to have Torri come join us to talk about the role of trustee, because this is kind of a hairy, thorny, misunderstood area. And I know that she's a great person to come and speak to it, because Tamarind Learning, if you don't know, offers a really great training on this topic and a lot of other topics in their accredited beneficiary stewardship program. So what I love about the Tamarind Learning program is that it has something for everyone. Kind of those people who are working for their family office already know a lot. They're going to learn something. And also a beneficiary or a spouse who really is starting at square one. There's something for everyone. And there's a lot on the role of trusts and trustees and beneficiaries in this curriculum. So super excited to have you here with us, Torri, to talk about all of that. And I guess before we get too far out in front, as you begin, can you explain the role of trustee, just starting at square one, in case we have anyone who's not super familiar with it, and kind of the purpose of a trustee and some of the duties?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start by normalizing, if you don't know the job of a trustee or the job of a beneficiary, you should feel fine with that. I am a trust beneficiary myself. I started working at Tamarind Learning in beneficiary education, was looking around in a course and was like, oh, so there's actually a term that describes what I do. I knew what a trustee was, but not a beneficiary. So if you're going into this, no shame if you don't know what's kind of coming up. So really short, quickly, the job of a trustee is to administer a trust. And through the lens of education, that amounts to 4 different sort of distinct areas. The first of which is to read and understand the trust document. Trust documents can be really complex. They can be really simple. They basically outline the rules and the regulations of a trust document, right? So that's sort of like the very first thing you need to do as a trustee is you need to be able to read and understand that trust document.
Okay,
Uh,
but time out, because they're not always written in English, right? Well, I mean, obviously they're written in English, but legalese a little bit, right?
yes.
And not always do people even know that they can do that, right? Or
Mhm.
so who should they ask if they haven't?
Yeah, so the grantor of the trust typically would be able to, if you're being asked to be a trustee or you already are a trustee and you haven't looked at that document, get it from the grantor. The grantor didn't draft it. The grantor is the person who created the trust. And in Canada, the settler. And we have a Canadian arm, so I can speak
Right.
occasionally with a little bit of success about the Canadian part, but don't hold me to it 100%.
Vincent appreciates that.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
we always we say the settler A up here. Tori, before you go on more about the role of a trustee, tell us more about why you care so much about this work that you're doing, because the we've known you for a couple of years, personally and professionally, with the work that you do with Tamarind, and you bring so much joy and love to this space. It's actually infectious. On a very dry topic, you do make it fun. I would just love for you to share a little snippet about why you care so much about this work. And then we can get back to some of these more technical questions that are needed for our audience to learn more about.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up because they're actually related, right? I was a beneficiary, I am a beneficiary, and no one ever told me that I had rights, responsibilities, and duties. And so I'm like a pretty proactive and engaged Rising Gen member, and I still didn't know this because there wasn't good transparency. And so I've always been passionate about educating the rising generation. And really, what I see in families is sometimes is people don't trust the rising gen to be engaged, and so they aren't given the opportunity. And so why I really, really love this work is we give families the opportunity to trust the rising gen to be engaged and informed, and that changes family systems. It's really transformational. I've seen it transform individuals, and I always say this is so much more than education. Like, this is so much more than understanding what a trustee's job is. Um, And so I'm really passionate about how it changes family systems as well, because we start to sort of redefine how families are thinking about their rising gen members. So yeah, I didn't have access to this information. I can tell you this education has transformed how I engage with our family office, with our operating company, with the board, with my trustee. And just again, like more just like personal and professional confidence. So I'm passionate in what I see in myself, in my family, and all the families that we work with.
Amazing. There's a theme that we've been that on this podcast for the last 10 months that we've been doing it. It's this idea of actually giving more responsibility to the rising gen, aka the three of us on this call. So I love that you said that, to actually help parents equip themselves and their kids with some responsibility to lean in.
Yeah. I'll shout out Paul Edelman here on parallel readiness. That
Yeah.
as much as the rising gen needs to be ready, the leading generation needs to be ready to, and it's not a baton pass. It is like I call it a potato sack race that we are in it together with different destinations. And so that's complicated, right?
That's cute.
Yes.
I like it.
Go ahead, Kristen.
So you were, I think you were talking about trustee responsibilities, and you
Yeah.
had shared, okay, you
You
certainly
got to
should be
know the
reading about
trust
trust.
document.
What
And then you
else?
actually have to take control of those assets. So that means having communication with either the prior trustee, or if you're being set up as a new trustee for a new trust, taking ownership, because you as a trustee actually are the legal owner, a fiduciary owner of these assets. I emphasize that because there's fiduciary responsibility here. And what I see kind of often is, you ask Aunt Susie, hey, would you be the trustee? And she's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And there's implications to that. So I'll talk to that a little bit more. The third thing that trustees do in their job is they make distributions, and this is really what most people think of when they think of a trustee, right? The trustee is the person who writes the checks, but that's really a lot more complicated. It's or a lot less complicated than sort of like everything else that's involved in the administration of the trust. And then so that leads to the fourth step that sort of is like has the biggest weight for me, which is you have this fiduciary responsibility to report and file taxes. And sometimes you have the ability, depending on the trust document, to delegate those responsibilities, but knowing exactly what you can do. So all of this it has a relationship with the beneficiary, it has a relationship to the grantor, and those are the parties to the trust. So all of these pieces need to be working together, and that's really the job of the trustee is to coordinate and make sure all of that happens effectively.
A real interconnected web of relationships on top of the web of relationships we already have in our family.
Yeah,
Couldn't get
definitely
couldn't get
emotionally complex, right?
Sounds like it. You touched on it a little bit, Tori. Can you lean in a little bit more? Some of the do's and don'ts when selecting a trustee for the family, like for your kids, as an example. What are some of the things that people should be thinking about? And what are some of the misunderstandings, screw ups, if we can be polite, that families make, that grantors or settlers make when looking for trustees?
Yeah, so grantors and settlers have a decision to make about how they want the trustee to engage with the beneficiary. And I think that's really important. So at Tamarind, something that we believe is the trustee has sort of a sacred duty to the beneficiary to educate and engage them. And depending on who you choose for that role, that maybe doesn't happen. So I just talked about that like really clinical part of this, but commingled in there is complexity, relationships, intent, and maybe there's a trust that has been going on for generations, less so in Canada with the 21-year rule. But in the US, we have dynastic trusts, we have generation skipping trusts. So you maybe don't know exactly what the grantor wanted for you. And part of the trustee's job is to help kind of navigate that, or it can be. So the grantor needs to pick someone who fits the intent of what they want that trust to do.
Then in a perfect world, what's that relationship like? Like, what's a good relationship look like? You talked a little bit about it, but I think some of the things that we often see, I'm thinking of a family I'm working with now where it's like, here you are, here's Aunt Susie, she's your trustee. What are some things grantors, settlers, families can do to help build that arguably maybe the most emotional touchy relationship one can have between trustee and beneficiary? Kristen, yeah, you too, because I know the work that you're doing with through Tamron with your peer groups touches on all these conversations as well.
Well, before you answer, Tori, what I'll say is their kind of like reaction when they learn all this. First of all, I would say the vast majority of them are like, "Wait, what? This is the role of trustee?" Because for many of them, there's a distance that's created, perhaps because there's been delegated duties, Tori, but many times because the grantor is still alive in their mind, in the minds of the beneficiary, it's the grantor that's making the decisions, and so they realize, like, "Oh, now I understand. Like officially, there is a trustee that I'm meant to be working with here." And so it is just, I think, the misunderstanding on all parts. Mm, I guess underneath of that is the missed opportunities that could be happening because it's not always really the most effective when you have mom and dad that even if it's in your mind are the ones that you're asking for money because it kind of keeps you in that, I don't know, it feels like a financial juvenile position. It actually would be helpful even if it was Aunt Susie to have someone else in the mix that I could be learning from and feel connected to in that way. So we hear that a lot. And I mean, that's a big eye opener. I would say the first big eye opener for the people who go through the Tamarind learning process in our group is that they're all like, wait a minute, is this what it is? Because I had no idea. And I need to go back to my family because I'm worried that they maybe don't understand it either.
Yeah, and I think back to my own experience when my mom set up a trust for us after my grandfather passed. The trustee, who I've known actually for a long time, he's a family attorney, said, "Well, and you can pick any trustee that you want. If you want to change, just let me know." And there was never a conversation before, during, after of what the implications of that meant. And why would I want to choose a different trustee? And there's, I think, for families and talking about missteps, again, making sure that that trustee is the right person for the individual. I think about a situation that we sometimes reference in which there was a family member who had really a lot of medical needs, and they picked a friend to be a trustee because they had a relationship with the beneficiary, and they're like, "Oh, this is going to be great. Like, they understand the needs, and this is going to be great." It was a full-time job to administer that trust with weekly medical requests, approving bills, making sure it aligned with the trust. And so it just wasn't a good fit. And I think it's really, again, important to understand, like, where you're balancing the emotional trade-offs with the trade-offs of the true work that has to be done. And it can be something that it takes a little bit of time to find the right fit. And you don't, if you pick a family member, a misstep, right, is, or a friend, or someone close to you in your life, that you pick someone and then something goes wrong. And now not only is the trust not running well, you're having a breakdown of relationships in a family system. And that's not an ideal outcome. So being thoughtful is really important.
Yeah, I'm smiling. I'm smiling because the same can be true when deciding to go work for the family business or not. I use a very simple line: working for mom and dad can be the greatest experience of your life, and it could possibly be
Yeah.
the hardest, most conflictual experience of your life. Same is true with this trustee relationship. Like you mentioned earlier, it's a fiduciary role. There's a legal requirement. So probably picking your friend, probably not the best. It's like the same way to bring a friend on your board because he knows us so well. I think we see this with families, family enterprises. The family relational dynamics are already so high. The benefit of having a neutral, non-family friend associated with helping us make the most complex decisions around money. I think, like, it sounds almost silly that you would bring your friend in to help administer it, but yet people do it maybe out of fear or out of comfort.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Fear and control, I think, are
I'll
big ones.
push back on this a little bit too to say I think it can work, right? Like my brother, we have a trustee committee kind of design, and my brother is one of the trustees for my kids' trusts. And I think it can work, assuming that person understands the role, right? And there's some sort of training, and the grantor is like, as you said, Tori, like offering them the trust to read and also describing kind of the approach that, you're hoping that they'll take and that the person understands what they're getting into. There's a lot of paper signing, there's a lot of administration that goes along with this. So I think it can work, but it just has to be approached a certain way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Informed consent, I think, across all
Mhm.
parties is really
Definitely.
helpful here.
That's good.
Congratulations, you're a beneficiary. Can you talk a little bit more? We'll get back to some technical conversations, Tori, because of your depth of knowledge in this space. What is, like, something that we always hear, the difference between a corporate trustee and then there goes my English, and an individual trustee? What are some of the differences that we hear with these terms?
Yeah, and it's relatively self-explanatory, and I think it's well described in the trade-offs. So an individual trustee is kind of what we've been talking about. It's a family member, it's someone sort of like close to you in your circle. And or the other side of it could be a friend, something like that, or an institution whose job is to administer this trust. And just like when you outsource anything, right? There's trade-offs of control, there's trade-offs of personal understanding. There's any number of things that an institution does really well versus what an individual can do really well. And I'll bring that back to an early question, which is, what do you want the trust to accomplish for the beneficiaries? If you just want it to make a quarterly distribution of X amount and it's really straightforward, I think that's a missed opportunity, but that's sometimes what a grantor might want. And that's okay. Then an institution might be a good fit. So this is really asking the grantor to do that work of, what is your intent here? What relationship do you want the trust and the trustee to have with the beneficiary? And then make your decision over, do you want a close relationship, or do you want something that's efficient and effective? Also, I will say institutions are really risk oriented. And so they're going to make the most conservative decision they can in alignment with the document. And that can be limiting to families with complex situations where judgment is required. And we've seen that go wrong before, right? That a beneficiary has a specific need, and the trustee, the institutional trustee, says, well, that doesn't fit within the document. Okay, well, in this particular case, my medical needs and that I need a support animal maybe aren't outlined in the document, but let's have a conversation about that this is an emotional support animal, that it provides XYZ, its quality of life, and isn't that within the intention of the document?
Also, I've seen where the risk side of corporate, when you're with a corporate trustee, where it's like, oh, they actually can't sign off on having certain assets inside of the trust. I don't know if it's like a private investment or something because it was a certain industry. So there's a lot of rules around risk for that as well. Also, came across a situation where a corporate trustee was not able to be the trustee on a trust that had like addiction clauses, just because that's too like nuanced and subjective and all of that. So I think that you can run into a couple of extra tricky rules or challenges too when you have a corporate trustee with all of that Aunt Susie wouldn't wouldn't flag for her.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely right. And that again, this is complex. We're dealing with human beings and, complex needs, and even like, let's say, education. Okay, like it's 2026. How we define education is different than we did 20 or 30 years ago, and what we view as an appropriate education expense. All of this is sort of like shifting and up to nuance and discretion. And I think that's one of the things that is a unspoken sort of responsibility of the trustee, is showing discretion. And like making good decisions around your understanding of the trust document. And sometimes there's going to be calls, and that's where the risk piece is like uncomfortable. You see lawsuits, right, with families torn apart by family trustees because someone made a call that they believe was right. And so an institution can protect you from that, but again, you're missing the ability to connect and educate and all of these other things that an individual trustee can do better potentially.
And I think that's another outcome that people have when they go through the Tamarind learning is sort of like an empathy building for trustees. I think the initial thought is like, trustee is keeping me on a diet, essentially like keeping me from a distribution. When you realize all that's involved, immediately you're like, okay, the trustee is really just trying to interpret the trust document and work in alignment to that, and has a fiduciary responsibility to do so. And so immediately you build empathy for the very difficult role that that is.
Yeah. And it's so needed in the family enterprise space, these empathetic conversations that are often missed, and for people's various roles. Like I think we always touch on it too on this podcast, having compassion for mom and dad and what they're going through with the level of decisions they have to make for themselves, for their kids, for the family, for the community, go down the line. So I think it's important, and you see again in this space in a very legal, dry, if I can put it, even though Tori, you make it a lot of fun. There's a lot of there's still this human emotion behind the legalese that people are impacted by these documents and these relationships. So it can't be understated. Go ahead, Tori.
I just was going to say, we say it's dry, but it's related to money, and money is inherently complicated.
Yeah. If you could share a couple of key takeaways for our listeners and take us home.
Yeah. So Kristen mentioned this, right? And one of the things that I think we really have to overcome is this idea in the beneficiary trustee dynamic that the trustee is an adversary. And so if people can really get on the same side of the line and play from the same team, it really can be transformational for both the beneficiary experience and the trustee experience. And part of the things and what we advocate for at Tamarind Learning, right, is that you as a beneficiary have a job. And that means that you need to be educated, empowered, and informed. And I think it's important to note that not every family system is going to allow for that. We get families who come to us and who are the decision makers for the Rising Gen members. And they're like, ooh, well, I don't want my kids to ask questions about the trust document, right? Like they are still trying to maintain control. And we don't advocate for you have to know exactly what's in your trust to benefit from this education. But, there are age and stage appropriate ways to do this. And education is a wonderful pathway to know that your rising gen children in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I've been to conferences where the 80-year-old dad is like, I don't want my 75-year-old son to know anything about this. And we want to break that down a little bit. And that shows up in being sort of like a prepared and responsible beneficiary as well. And I think that's really important, is knowing that you have a job here as well. And that's really, really important. I'll share a personal story that's attached to this and sort of like how this plays out in real life. Is I recently purchased a home, and because I have this context of my relationship to my trustee, when I went to ask for a significant trust distribution, I knew what kind of assets were in the trust. I knew, relatively how liquid they were, what I needed to do to like get the trustee the right information, and being really thoughtful and prepared. And so that's sort of like how you can make the trustee's job easier. I also didn't feel any anxiety going through the mortgage process. I knew I had communicated. I knew when the money was coming. I knew that, nothing was happening in sort of like retrospect or in a rush. And so being thoughtful makes everyone's life a little bit easier, as long as that's possible, right? Given the context and the situation.
Well, that's huge. And we see that too. People just getting more empowered through the whole process. And gosh, I feel like this is such a big topic. I feel like we could spend an hour more talking about this, but I guess we'll wrap it for today. But what I do want people to know is how they can get in touch with you if they want to dive in further.
Yeah, perfect. So tamarindlearning.com is where you can find our comprehensive beneficiary education program. So you could take one course if you want to dip your toe in and see if sort of self-directed e-learning is for you, but you can also learn alongside your family. We serve the Canadian market as well, as we've shared. So that's tamarindlearning.ca. And find us on, all the good social medias. LinkedIn is where we put out the most stuff. We have the Tamarind Learning podcast as well. We post that monthly, and it has really fantastic insights on it. And so you can also follow me, Torri Hawley, on LinkedIn. I post a lot of personal things. I also post kind of behind the scenes what's going on at Tamarind. So I hope to see you guys on the internet, and I hope to see you at Tamarind Learning. And Kristen didn't plug this maybe, and is that she does run curriculum through with groups. And so if you want a more high touch group focused experience, Kristen is doing really beautiful work that we're really excited to partner on.
Yeah, and the accountability of that too, right? Everyone does their homework the night before we meet, which is helpful. We all need a little accountability in our lives, right? And we're
Absolutely.
so excited to have you guys as a partner. And I'm really glad to not have to write all of that curriculum, because these are the things that are hard, like the technical piece. And I was so excited when you all put this together to have what I call kind of beneficiary in a box, and to have everything all in one spot. So we do hope people will follow you, because you've got such great info coming out. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was super helpful.
That's another episode of the Family Wealth Edge. Kristen, I think we have found a reoccurring guest that we're going to bring back to our podcast.
Let's do it.
Torri,
I love it. Lots more to talk about.
absolute pleasure. Lots more to talk about. We'll see you folks soon.